with chemical agriculture, it's always the same story. They release a chemical, they're like, it's perfectly safe, tested for safety, blah blah blah. 20 years goes by. Actually, it causes cancer. Okay, we're going to get rid of it. Then a new one comes along, it's the same thing. Tested for safety, rigorous testing, this and that. 20 years goes by. Actually, we said it wasn't persistent in the environment, but it's actually leaching on pretty much everything. And like glyphosate's like 80% of rainwater these days in the US. I was like, okay, we'll get rid of it. It's the same story over and over again. So with anything health related, I always go by guilty until proven innocent.
Right.
And I got that from before Pierre. So just presume it's not healthy for you if basically, um, no absolutes, but 99.9% of the time, just presume it's not healthy for you. Uh, and that's it. Just go with that, and is it going to prevent everything? No, because just by living in this environment, you're exposed to toxicity for sure. But
Yeah.
you can do a lot also to decrease your toxic load.
Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. I'm Nathan Riley, your host. I'm a board-certified OBGYN, and I'm a sucker for suffering, I guess. I went for a second board specialty in hospice and palliative care, and after years and years and years of education and really kind of self-exploration into a variety of topics, including functional medicine, anthroposophic medicine, biogeometry, herbalism, and really traditional midwifery, I realize that I can't possibly see every single client that comes my way. And there's a lot of room out there, I think, for public forward facing education. And that's what the Holistic OBGYN podcast is all about. And it's not just your typical OBGYN podcast where we're talking about just cervical health or just birth or just postpartum, although you'll get a lot of that here. We also talk about optimizing a lifestyle in order to mitigate the potential downfalls that come with pregnancy. We're talking basic pregnancy complications. We're also talking about men's health because, there's 50% of the population is men and many of them are going to be fathers someday. So they're curious as to how to get pregnant, right? How to get their partners pregnant, how to optimize their testosterone, their mood, their libido. What can I do now to prepare for fatherhood? Those types of topics come up a lot. And my guest today is Eugene Trufkin, also known as Evgeny Trufkin. That's his author name on his various books. Eugene is not a dad, but he has dedicated his 38 years of life to learning everything he possibly can and then applying it in his own life in order to optimize his well-being. And that, if you go and check out Eugene on Instagram, you will see this guy has it pretty well dialed in. He works with clients of all ages in order to optimize their life. He mostly works with men, and the variety of topics that are swirling right now around testosterone replacement and biohacking and all these tricks, Eugene doesn't have much space for that because he, like I, feels that the best way to go about optimizing our health, our fertility, our sleep, and everything comes from the most natural and cost-effective means possible. Meaning you could go and spend $1 million a year on supplements and fancy devices and all that, or you could get down to the very, very basics. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Eugene's two books are The Laws of Aesthetics. This is a long title, so let me look it up. Laws of Aesthetics, a definitive blueprint to rapid fat loss, the perfect body, and living a health-centered lifestyle. Sorry, tripping over my words a little bit here. His other book is, and this is his newer book, Anti-Factory Farm Shopping Guide. Both of those can be found in the podcast description, wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as in the show notes at belovedholistics.com. I'll also include a whole bunch of other links that I think are relevant. One thing we finished the conversation with is balancing the nervous system and periodization of our stress in our days. Productivity is really the name of the game in the United States. The more you produce, the more valuable you are. But if we were to hearken back to even 100 years ago, it was not common for people to be under stress at all times up until the moment you go to sleep, and then starting right up, the moment you wake up, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So I'll include some information as well, a bunch of references from this show, including the Prana Foundation at pranafoundation.org and the polyvagal both of which are really centered around the polyvagal theory of how the nervous system works. It's not just sympathetic and parasympathetic. There's also the dorsal vagal parasympathetic. And then you've got your sympathetic, your fight or flight, but then you have your ventral vagal parasympathetic. There's so much to unpack within the nervous system that Eugene and I didn't get have a full opportunity to dive into here, but we do go deep into the food system, using basic nutritional principles, not just to boost our testosterone, but also to just boost our overall well-being. And these principles are equally important for men as they are for women. We get into chemicals and fertilizers and how the FDA has kind of led us astray as to what we may consider safe to eat, even when we are going out and trying to find the best produce. We get into the importance of sleep. We get into the importance of periodizing, meaning not weightlifting your hardest every single day of the year, but actually taking periods of rest, and how all of this, along with our nervous system supported strength and conditioning and our lifestyles, how all of this plays into optimal human function, not just looking at one individual system. So you're going to love hearing from Eugene. This guy's such a breadth of knowledge that we could only get through part of his recommendations in this hour-long episode. We're going to have him back soon, where we'll wrap up our conversation and dig into some other topics. But you're going to love this one. Because this podcast is totally free, I rely on a couple sponsors to keep the lights on. The first is BIRTHFIT. And since we're speaking of nervous system supported strength and conditioning program, BIRTHFIT is the place to be. Whether you're preconception, you're actively pregnant now, whatever trimester, or you're postpartum, whether you're 2 days postpartum or 12 weeks postpartum, customizing how you get back into a movement regimen, how you nourish yourselves on a physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual level, how you balance out your nervous system. This is all the purview of a really responsible health or exercise professional. And unfortunately, not a lot of the pros out there, at least the self-proclaimed pros out there, they have no clue what to do in pregnancy or postpartum. So fortunately, BIRTHFIT is here. Find yourself a BIRTHFIT professional. I have gone through their coaching program. The people that are doing this work are exceptional. There is nothing like it out there. So I encourage you to go to birthfit.com, check out their programs. With code Beloved, you can get 20% off their postpartum basics program, which is day by day an exercise, a movement, a breathing program for you to get back into your operational status as you felt before you had your baby, now that you're in this postpartum lying in period. You can also use code Beloved at birthfit.com to get 1 month free in their B community, which is a community made by women for women, where you can get all of your questions answered. You can you'll be meeting in regular webinars. You'll have a whole library of resources there in order to help answer your questions and figure out how to personalize your lifestyle in pregnancy and postpartum, alongside a lot of other like-minded individuals. Birthfit.com. Thank you, BirthFit, for supporting the show. This episode was also brought to you by Organifi, and you've heard about them probably on other podcasts, but there is one particular product that is unique, that is, I think, critical for those of you who are listening, and that is Organifi's Harmony Blend. Now, before I tell you about what's in this, remember that all of their ingredients are glyphosate-free, they're all non-GMO, they're all gluten-free, they're all USDA organic. Everything that Drew Canole and his team at Organifi put into their products is the creme de la creme, as they say, somewhere in Europe, probably France. So this Harmony Blend is a really, really great additive, a supplement for those women who are listening, because it includes superfoods like maca, rich in antioxidants. It's delicious because they use cacao, loaded with polyphenols. Anandamide is also rich in cacao. That's the bliss molecule. Chaste tree berry. It is a common sort of the generic is chaste tree, but you've probably heard it called Vitex. This is going to help you regulate your menstrual cycles by sensitizing the ovaries to the chemicals from the brain, especially luteinizing hormone, in order to balance out the estrogen or progesterone. Because if you don't have enough progesterone in your body and you're of reproductive age, your ovaries are still presumably working, it demonstrates that you're probably not ovulating Ovulation and menstruation, they're different things, and they're equally important as two balancing forces throughout the 4 phases of your menstrual cycle. Drew has also included shatavari, which is a very, very well-known, well-studied adaptogenic herb. It will help to balance out and regulate any, let's just say, perturbations in the variety of hormone feedback loops, specifically as it relates to your adrenals and your gonads. And of course, those feedback into the brain. So you can see an improvement in libido, decrease in your PMS and menopausal symptoms with the addition of shatavari. Also, stinging nettle, a well known Chinese herb, at least through the lens of Chinese herbalism, a really, really potent blood and kidney tonic. You can take stinging nettle as a tea. You can put it in your vaginal steaming herbs. You can take baths within it. It's packed with antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds. So stinging nettle is a necessary ingredient. Turmeric, of course, a very, very ancient herb, rich in curcumin. This supports a healthy immune system, can help improve exercise-induced muscle soreness. Tons of antioxidant support from turmeric. Ginger, Ceylon cinnamon, coconut milk, acacia. There is so much good stuff packed into each scoop of Organifi's Harmony Blend. If you want to give this a shot, go to Organifi.com/beloved, add it to the cart, and you'll enjoy 20% off your purchase. Organifi, thank you so much for continuing to support the show. And given that we've talked about what we're talking about on this episode, BirthFit and Organifi are both two really, really beautiful contributions to what I'm putting together over here in my revolution that is the Holistic OBGYN podcast. So without further ado, Eugene here is going to dispel a bunch of myths. He's going to lay down some really, really important principles in order for you, whether you're a man or a woman, to live the healthiest you possibly can. And I hope you look forward to part 2. But for now, sit back and enjoy my conversation with Eugene Trufkin. Eugene, I get a lot of criticism on a daily basis around my poor choice of attire on social media. And so I'm wearing a shirt right now, and I'm surprised to see you're wearing a shirt as well, because I usually see you half naked on Instagram looking amazing. So I just wanted to give you a little shout out there. It's like us Matthew McConaughey wannabes not owning shirts. So
Yeah, I keep it simple, man. I only have black t-shirts. I have
black
8
t-shirts.
black t-shirts and 8 black shorts. And that's it. That's why you wake up in the morning, it's like, what do you want? This black shirt or that black shirt? It's like less stuff to think about, and you can think about maybe what's a little more important. But then again, fashion isn't like a passion of mine, so I don't really care about that part.
The passion for fashion. Jeff, that will not be the title of the episode. Eugene, thanks for coming on. You and I have been shooting the breeze over texting and social media, and you send me a lot of really, really good stuff to read, and I've certainly appreciated that. But gosh, you've got a breadth of knowledge around a variety of things, and we're going to get into the farming system, where our food is coming from. I actually think this is a very kind of prescient moment for us all right now to realize that if we don't start really educating ourselves, we're going to see more and more farmlands slip out of the reach of local farmers, to be put, lands that could otherwise be put towards regenerative practices that you and Kyle Kingsbury have shot the shit on his podcast about. You were on Paul Chek, Living 4D podcast, talking about some of these things. And while people might feel like, gosh, we've heard this before, I think we need to keep talking about it. Like, we need to really impress upon people how important this is. And before we were recording, I was saying there are 2 types of people out there that have something to say. One person, the one archetype is the person who has a ton of diplomas behind them on the wall, and then there's the type of person who may be the same person. I like to think I can bridge these worlds pretty well, but there's other people out there who have just experimented to such a degree that they've dialed in their own lifestyle, so much so that they can look like you do and feel and lift and experience life the way you do without relying on pharmaceuticals, without relying on our processed food manufacturers in order to make sense of this. So let's start there. You are a pretty high level performing male. And how old are you, Eugene? Just out of curiosity.
38 and a half.
38 and a half. So you and I are almost the same age, and many of our I don't know, our cohort of young men out there are using testosterone replacement and all
Mhm.
these things, but you really pride yourself. And I feel very fortunate to know you because you've become a mentor to me on a variety of techniques you can use to really to optimize a man's health well into their 30s, well into their 40s, hopefully into our 60s. We'll still be like, looking and feeling great. But maybe talk a little bit about that. And of course, finding appropriate food is really, really critical, I think, to doing this right. But let's talk a little bit about that. How have you managed to stay off of testosterone replacement therapy when so many young men, even in their 20s now, are using this stuff in order to, quote, optimize their health? I see it as a crutch, if anything, and maybe worst case scenario, potentially more harmful than beneficial for many of us.
Yes. So first, thanks obviously for having me on the show and everything. I think it's really cool, and I appreciate it. And yeah, I do agree with you. In most cases, it does more harm than good. Of course, with human health, as you know, there's no absolutes, no direct answers. And the only way to really give solid answers is to really have that patient in front of you and know their background and exactly what they're trying to achieve and their goals and stuff of that sort. So I'll be happy to go over all of the steps like I do personally, and I do with a lot of my clients to increase their testosterone to pretty high levels. I mean, I got to keep it realistic. Like naturally, I mean, you're looking at 800 to 1,000 nanograms per deciliter going into your late 30s. But looking at the statistics, you'll see that most young 20-year-old, like early 20-year-olds, are like below 600. Oftentimes maybe in 300 or 400. So hovering around 800 to 1,000 is pretty high in today's standards. And that's important to understand by today's standards, right? But actually, like a very help. Oh, I think your audio is off. Nate.
Sorry about that. Is that total or free testosterone that you're talking about in case somebody is looking at their lab work right
Oh,
now?
yes. So it's total. If it's free, that would be through the roof. You'd be like a super mutant, probably like Wolverine or something. So I'm referring to total testosterone, obviously. So the advice I'm going to be giving out, the only evidence I could really provide is just through a bunch of clients and myself, and it does consistently get them to 800 to 1,000 nanograms per deciliter. Just like I showed you my 56-year-old client, I was able to get him, and I showed you his blood work. I was able to get him from like 325 nanograms to all the way 750, and he's like 56 years old, and stuff of that sort. The good news is, and I could go into the details of a lot of this stuff. The good news is a lot of this stuff is actually fairly easy to understand intellectually, and I feel that's where people get things
Yeah.
wrong. They're like, "Oh yeah, I get it," and I'm like, "I know you get it, and I know it's easy to understand, but are you really doing all of this consistently enough to have enough stimulus to actually create this change
Yeah.
in a world and a society that doesn't facilitate health conscious choices anymore?
Yeah.
That doesn't kind of positively reward you for taking care of yourself. Setting healthy boundaries at work, et cetera, et cetera. And all of these little variables play a huge part in terms of like what job you pick, what relationships you get into. They actually play like a huge part in your not only in being happy in life, but also in optimizing your hormones so you can optimize either your aesthetic goals or just how you feel or your athletic goals, et cetera, et cetera. For me, it's mainly like aesthetics at this point. I kind of don't really play any sports anymore. I do go hunting occasionally, but that's about it. It's more of a recreational pastime, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I'll be happy to go over everything. And the good news too is most of it, pretty much 90% of it is free.
Yeah.
So literally it's accessible by anyone that actually just has the knowledge and wants to implement it. And I'm going to describe it in a way that people can just take this information and actually use it.
Yeah.
It's not going to be complicated, it's not going to be elaborate. And for sure, once again, I really have to emphasize it's going to be easy to understand, but that's not where the power is in. Like, are you actually doing this? That's the real question. And if you are, my argument and from my observation is you can bring your levels up to at least 800 nanograms per deciliter all the way up into your 50s. No problem. And people looking at getting on testosterone replacement therapy, if they actually do it the right way, the most they're going to bring you up to is 800 anyways. So, of course, you're not going to be cruising around like 2000, like pro bodybuilder levels following this stuff for sure. But most people, I mean, I hope don't even want to be at those like unhealthy levels anyways. So for people on TRT thinking about it, I would just say it might be a good idea to do all this stuff. That way, even if you do take it, you'd have to take such minute quantities to reach the levels you want to be at and still have exponentially better results and just overall look better and be healthier, because a lot of times, especially with aesthetics, it's not so much like how big your muscles are and stuff of that sort. It's like how good your skin looks, how good your hair looks. Just do you look like you have a lot of vitality in your life, et cetera, et cetera. That stuff goes a long way as well. So, and we'll break it down one thing at a time. I have some notes here because I usually forget a
Yeah.
bunch of stuff
Yeah.
here. And you're welcome. Of course, you have a wealth of knowledge in this area as well. So to not make it sound like a monologue, you're welcome to just pitch in and what you do as well, because you've done a lot of stuff that works for you well also. Like I don't have all the answers and I have a bunch of answers. Is it for everyone? It's probably not for everyone, but it will be for sure a good starting point for where a lot of people are in their current journey for sure.
So Eugene, what I'm hearing first and foremost is I think a person needs to try to appreciate what is your goal, right? Like, are you
Yes.
trying to build bigger muscles? Are you trying to live longer? Are you trying to, I don't know, get pregnant and have kids? Like, there's all these various goals that a person can have, such that not every biohack or dietary protocol or even pharmaceutical is necessarily going to get you anywhere unless you're very clear as to why you're trying to get there and where you're trying to go in the first place.
Yes, that's why health podcasts are so tough, because
Yeah.
people are like saying like do this, do that. I'm like, and the listeners like, "Dude, you don't even know me. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't even know my
Yeah.
goals." I guess same with like a lot of other genres like financial podcasts, like become a millionaire or spend your whole life working and grinding so you can be make billions. I'm like, dude, you don't even know my life goals, or my core values. So of course it all starts there. So I guess to be more specific, let's just focus on how to bump up your total testosterone. That's an easy one to cover and more straightforward. And for the listeners, if they're interested in doing this, just know it's best to reach out to someone uh, like Nate or someone that specializes in the area. The advice I'm giving out here is more over a conversation between him and I, and not meant to be like any advice that you want to do. So I'm not like
Yeah.
coaching anyone on this call, to make it clear.
Amen.
So let's start with just the basics, right? Let's start with looking at it at an etiology tree, and then that way it's easy to understand step by step in a hierarchical manner. And then we can kind of break down which of these blocks to focus on. So we got to look at like a person goes into the clinic, they get their total testosterone taken, it comes in at like 200, 300, which a lot of males are at these days, even in their 20s. And that's kind of depressing. The doctor will say, "Oh, you have kind of like low testosterone, most likely, right?" And that's a good finding, and it's important to start seeing that as like a symptom, right? Because you don't want to get caught in symptom management loopholes, because that for sure might at best get you some results short term and some positive feedback short term for sure, but you're not going to get anywhere medium or long term kind of managing symptoms. So for the average person, they'll go like, okay, so I have a low testosterone, let's say 300 nanograms per deciliter. I'm supposed to be, let's say, at 800 or whatever, and I should increase my testosterone. And the doctor will go like, okay, so most, not everyone, but most doctors will go, okay, so you got to do testosterone replacement therapy, especially if they're going to our TRT clinic, obviously. And they're like, okay, so I'll take testosterone, and that's it. That's going to solve all my problems. I'm going to feel good, look good. But if you look up a lot of data, maybe there is some type of improvement short term if they only do the testosterone route, meaning they only get the injection, for example, or do the cream or the oral or whatever. But in a long enough follow up, there's typically like no improvement. Symptoms return like low energy, low libido, whatever, et cetera, et cetera. And the belief system that led to that low testosterone, that's important, is still there. And even if you take testosterone, if that belief system isn't changed or certain aspects of it aren't changed, it's going to lead to a myriad of other issues with your mental or physical health, which are once again going to lead to lowering your testosterone or throwing off your hormones in some way or another. So it's important to really see low testosterone as a symptom. Your body is trying to tell you something, and it's important to see it as a symptom of typically unsustainable and poor lifestyle and nutritional choices. Okay. No
Yeah.
absolutes, but 98% of the time, this is for sure the case. And let's go ahead and break this down. And once again, for the listeners, this is going to be easy stuff, but I ask you to honestly ask yourself, easy stuff to understand, but I honestly ask yourself, like, are you honestly doing this?
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
answer 99.8% of the time, even with gym goers, no, they're not. And that could be one of the reasons why your testosterone remains low and stuff of that sort. So let's kind of break it down and we'll talk about the obvious stuff that has been covered a million times over first, and then the more less talked about stuff, which I feel is actually honestly more important later. And once again, I have nothing to do today. So if you want to chat for 10 hours, I'm happy to chat about this for forever. But I know you two guys have a life for sure. So I'll respect your time. Just let me know if you want me to speed it up or slow it down and stuff of that sort. But let's talk about the basic stuff first that's been covered a million times over. So first and foremost, nutrition is going to be an important part. And I know everyone has heard a podcast on nutrition and stuff of that sort. And it's really impossible to tell a person their nutrition advice without once again meeting them and knowing exactly what they're at. So I'm going to focus on just sourcing better quality food. And then it's up to the person to determine how to distribute their macros, what to eat on a deload week versus active week, et cetera, how many total calories they need to have. So my focus is on when I hear, especially in America, the average person say they eat healthy. I like highly doubt that because if you question them, I'm like, okay, so what's your definition of eating healthy even mean? They would go, well, I'm doing fasting, or I don't eat as much, or I'm doing some kind of fad diet, ABC. So this is a huge stumbling block, and people need to realize that they really need to, if they want to optimize their testosterone, their aesthetics, how they feel, they really do need to customize the nutrition program specifically for their needs and just understand that it's going to change depending on if you're in an accumulation phase, intensification phase, if you're trying to gain muscle, if you're trying to lose body fat, if you're trying to just maintain, if you're an endurance athlete, whatever. And it really does need to be customized to you, and it's it could send you down the wrong path of just listening to stuff online or even reading books, even from credible people, because they never met you personally. So that's like a huge stumbling block. And of course, I do highly recommend people become their own mechanics, but just know that's not going to happen by watching TikTok videos. You need to, read 2 to 3 books a week on nutrition and maybe take a few courses and then maybe hire a few mentors and then do a lot of A/B testing and see what works well for you over the years. But one good thing that I could definitely generalize is people need to focus on sourcing better quality food. And we can speak about this for hours on end, any of these topics today, but I'm just going to summarize these. And of course, if you want to go in more detail, I'll be happy to go in a lot more detail on any subject. But sourcing like legitimate grass-fed, grass-finished beef, versus factory farm beef. And eating primarily meats that are fed a species-specific diet is huge. So that would be grass-fed, grass-finished beef, grass-fed, grass-finished bison, deer, elk, wild fish, any wild game is going to be a great source of protein. Even if you get eggs, maybe getting eggs from pasture-raised operations that aren't fed heavy amounts of corn and soy, such as happy-hens.com is a great resource. They can go on that website, even if it's not in your area, at least you can have a good reference of what good farming practices look like in that area. So you could also decrease your toxic load a tremendous amount. The average newborn, especially in your area, is born in a metropolitan area, is born with trace amounts of 200 different chemicals in their bloodstream already, of synthetic chemicals from the environment, from the food, from plastics, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously, especially if they're estrogenic chemicals, if the load is high enough, that's going to have an impact on your hormonal balance and eventually your total testosterone as well. Just teaching even people about the importance of not drinking tap water and sourcing high quality filtered water. Like a Berkey is a great solution. I would even say, unfortunately, these days, because of the contamination of the water, maybe a 5-stage reverse osmosis like sink filter would be a great alternative too. Although, unfortunately, you're just absolutely destroying everything in the water at that point. But at least you're decreasing your exposure to uh, a myriad of different chemicals found in tap water, for example, in environment, including pharmaceutical chemicals as well, on a daily basis, especially if you're very physically active. I mean, in a hot climate, you're looking at drinking like maybe a gallon a day. So it adds up. You're doing that 7 days a week. That toxic load could biomagnify in your tissue over time.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of these, especially with farming chemicals, for example, a lot of these chemicals are never tested for safety as complete formulations, which is important to understand because a lot of times you have a lot of people quoting credible people in nutrition too, quoting like, oh, it's safe. It's been proven safe to be on your food. So don't worry about it as long as you have it in this dose. It's not toxic, et cetera, et cetera. But the problem is um, with a lot of agricultural chemicals, especially pesticides, the complete formulation is never tested for safety. And what I mean by that, by complete formulation, is that Roundup weed killer that you find at Home Depot or maybe Walmart. uh, they never take that complete product, spray it on some weeds, and then taste the safety, or spray it on some crops and then taste the safety on mice. They just test the active ingredient in isolation on its own. So I know you know this, and I'm speaking more to your audience here in this vantage point, but any complete formulation is basically composed of active ingredients and a whole bunch of inactive ingredients or inert ingredients, which are meant to kind of support the active ingredient. And a lot of this testing, it is first and foremost done in-house by the scientist hired by the chemical company, and then the results are sent to the FDA for approval. So that's one thing you got to consider. Okay. So there's a lot of conflict of interest there. B, they never test the complete formulation for safety. They test the active ingredient in isolation on its own,
That's
which is
right.
yeah, which it's never used like that in the real world. If you go visit any farm, they use a myriad of different synthetic biocides in any one crop season. Complete formulations, not only active ingredients of those synthetic biocides. B, C, the dose of those ingredients, the dose of those compounds are never used correctly in the field. They're usually using way more than what they're supposed to be using. It's just the oversight is very wishy washy and they get away with it quite a bit. So that's another very important thing to consider. A fourth thing, I'm even losing track of how many things I'm listing here, but a fourth thing to consider is a lot of these chemicals are actually made to be absorbed by the root system of the crop, which those crops, once again, are fed to animals. So this doesn't only apply to vegetarians, it applies to meat eaters as well, because the residue, the chemical residue of those crops then biomagnifies into the tissue of the animal. And with the crops, let's say like I don't know, carrots or apples or whatever, there's no washing that off. The,
Right.
the residue of the pesticide is just a very small amount on the surface. Most of it is actually embedded in the actual crop itself, which you end up eating. Can't even peel that off, for example. So these things are very important to understand, and they completely go under the radar of most people, especially most health conscious people that are even trying to make the right
Trying
choice.
to do the right thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was one of them for a really long time. That's one of the things that motivated me to write the second book. It just started with just trying to find healthy eggs, man. That's all I wanted. I wasn't on a grand mission to save the world, or I'm not even on a mission now. I just wanted healthy food. And you find when you actually start looking into it, especially with the American food supply, how tough it is to find that food. It is very easy now. Just some websites I've been able to find to make it super easy for your listeners. Check out americangrassfed.org, scroll to the bottom of the website, click on the interactive map. You'll get a laundry list of legitimate regenerative farms that you could select from. Most all of them ship directly to you. Companies I personally had a great experience with were azgrassraisedbeef.com. Amazing company in Arizona that is AGA certified, which is pretty much like the gold standard of grass-fed certifications. So it's a legitimate grass-fed product that's able to be grass-fed throughout all of the seasons of production.
Yeah.
So the grass-fed certification, they do on-site inspection, which doesn't happen with most grass-fed operations. Most grass-fed operations, you just kind of say you're grass-fed, submit some paperwork, and that's it. No one's
Yeah.
going to come check and nothing. And one of my good friends, which I'm actually doing a research project with right now at Michigan State University, Dr. Jason Roundtree, they selected a bunch of grass-fed products at the supermarket. This is what you as a consumer are exposed to, tested its nutritional profile, and the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio on pretty much half of the products came in like grain-fed beef, for
Oh,
example.
wow.
So it's not as easy to find as most people think. Is it the biggest player in upping your testosterone? I'd say it's not like the deal breaker, but I'm just showing you, just even in this facet of the journey, and it's a long list of stuff we're going to go over today, how confusing it already gets and how misled people are. And then they wonder why, uh, they're trying all this stuff. And it seems like if they do even get rid of one symptom, like one health issue, just another health issue pops up. And they
Right.
spend their whole entire life just chasing one symptom after another, which is great money for the healthcare system, no doubt. But I really feel bad for the patient because
Yeah.
they're sick their entire life. They're struggling with one mental or physical illness their whole entire life from one thing to another, or the same thing, plus stacking other things as time goes on.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
common scenario as well.
Uh,
So go ahead.
Eugene, let me interject something to go back to something you had said before about the FDA. So, first off, before I even get into that, I remember, like you, when I was in college, I was trying to find good produce and I didn't have a lot of money, but it was like, okay, I'll buy the like moderately good produce that seems pretty organic compared to this other junk. There was like two grocery stores in Pittsburgh, my hometown. Giant Eagle was the big brand out there, like Kroger's is in most of the Midwest, and there was one that was down the street in that direction and one the other direction, and the one, to my left, if I went west, was going to be like slightly better. So I would go there and try to do my best to use my money to buy the right things, and then I would get like a wash, like a vegetable rinse, and I thought that I was doing the right thing. But then of course you start to learn more and more, and as you said, it's actually, on the one hand, when you're growing vegetables in crappy soil that has all these pollutants in it and toxic stuff in it, it becomes incorporated into the carrot, as you said. So it's not enough to wash it. But then furthermore, when you're adding specifically nitrogen-based fertilizers to soil, you end up making that soil like a not a living soil anymore. The
Yeah.
soil becomes dependent on chemical inputs. So
Yes.
these farmlands that for 2 or 3 generations of crappy conventional farming, which we can't blame the farmers, there's a lot of government subsidies that go towards producing specific crops. The use of these fertilizers and these other chemical additives has actually made the soil completely dead in and of itself. So you get like a dead carrot that grows out of dead soil. And then the next thing I'll say, I want to add before you go on, this is awesome, by the way, is that I'm working on a course right now called Clear and Free. It's your solution to persistent HPV. It's around the immune system and how, eating the proper diet and everything can help boost your immune system to clear HPV and blah, blah, blah. But a big part of this has been diving into the additive ingredients, let's say, the adjuvants, as they call them, the aluminum salts and whatnot in vaccine vials. And there's a couple, there's a whole bunch of weird things that are in vaccine vials, but like polysorbate 80, it's an emulsifying agent. When you look at the research, the FDA has granted approval for these medicines to be released to the public. And the FDA says itself, all ingredients used in a licensed product and any diluent provided as an aid in the administration of the product shall meet generally accepted standards of purity and quality. So this is our oversight body, the Food and Drug Administration. Yet, all that little phrase means, when you ask them, hey, has each of these individual ingredients been studied? When the FDA responds to that, they're saying, we know that all of those additives are of the highest purity and quality. Well, like how much of an aluminum salt, no matter how pure or high quality, is okay in our bodies in injectable form? You could say the same about literally every other agent
Mhm.
that's used in our food system.
Yep.
So we've got a big problem here, and it would be nice if we could lean on some of these 3 and 4 letter organizations to do this job for us. But frankly, I think that it's time for us to really start like getting our noses in the books and having conversations like this so we can fully understand the complexities around why that organic stamp doesn't necessarily mean squat or some other certification. So anyways, go on. As you were, I'd love for you to clarify a little bit what sorts of labels you actually look for in order to ensure that you're getting the highest quality produce or beef or whatever, if you can go down that path a little bit too. Hey guys, it's Nathan. Sorry for this brief interruption, but I got to tell you about a new offering that I'm going to be making available this fall. You've heard about the Born Free Method. That's our comprehensive pregnancy and postpartum program. Includes 12 months of weekly calls, 100 plus video modules, tons of citations around pregnancy and postpartum. Well, Born Free is an umbrella under which there's going to be a lot of other courses. And the second course in this anthology is called Clear and Free, Your Solution to Persistent HPV. It's a collaborative effort between me and Mimi Lindquist of the Medicine podcast. She is a relative expert in, I say relative because I don't consider anybody a full expert in anything, but Mimi has gone deep into human papillomavirus and some of the ways that we can use lifestyle to augment the immune system in hopes that your routine screening for HPV or your routine pap smears are going to come up negative and clear, so you can go another 3 to 5 years and not even think about it until your next appointment, whereby hopefully you'll screen negative again. So the typical path that many women experience of all ages in their OBGYN clinic is, hey, you're due for a pap smear and we're going to test for HPV as well. If one of those comes back abnormal, your OBGYN is going to say, oh, darn it, it's abnormal. Why don't you come back for a repeat screening in 6 months or 12 months? And this process continues, right, until you end up with either a progression of abnormal cells in the cervix caught on pap smear or a persistence of human papillomavirus, meaning your body has not been able to integrate the message of this virus, right? Remember, viruses are not living things. So in the meantime, your OB/GYN or your midwife or nurse practitioner hasn't given you any tools in order to help support your immune system through diet, through movement, through sleep, through stress management, through hydration, through all of those modifiable lifestyle factors, so that you can be sure that if you had an HPV positive screen initially, that the next time it's going to be negative. Now, the other part of that conversation, of course, is, hey, I got the HPV vaccine. Aren't I safe now? Well, the problem with Gardasil 9, which is the primary vaccine that is offered to young men and women as early as age 9, has not been demonstrated to be either effective at preventing cervical cancer nor safe because of the aluminum adjuvants and everything else. So there's a lot of controversy around HPV and cervical cancer, and even cervical cancer screening methods, along with this vaccine. What do I do? Should I get it? Should I not get it? Should my little girls get this vaccine? And so, given the sort of swirling pool of information and misinformation out there, I went deep as well. And Mimi and I teamed up in order to clarify for everybody out there the realities around what HPV and cervical cancer screening looks like, what can be done while you're waiting for your follow-ups in order to support your immune system to integrate the message of that virus and avoid any abnormal cells developing, and hopefully avoid painful biopsies, or even worse, LEEP procedures, cold knife comb procedures, and of course, worst case scenario, cervical cancer. There's so much that's in your power. Your doctors, your practitioners probably aren't maybe educated or incentivized to share all of that information, but we're going to do that through this course, as well as all of the realities around vaccines, especially Gardasil 9. We look at data from the United States and elsewhere in the world. We speak to attorneys who are litigating on this topic around Gardasil 9. What you can expect from the course is around 90 lessons, self-guided. And we're going to also offer monthly calls for 6 months after you enroll with me and Mimi, where we're going to be able to answer all of your questions and provide you with that support that perhaps you aren't getting from the healthcare professionals that you've entrusted your cervical cancer screening and your well woman care. So we get into HPV, we get into cervical cancer screening, we get into the immune system, vaccines, viruses. It's everything you've wanted to know about any of those topics. Go to the link in the show notes and you'll find your way to book an enrollment call, and we'll get you enrolled right there. We're going to be enrolling in October. I hope to see you there.
Yeah, no problem. And again, you're welcome to speak as much as possible, because sometimes these podcasts end up being like a monologue. I feel like I keep going on, but I also love to hear what the hosts have to say, because oftentimes they're actually health experts themselves as well and have like a cool different vantage point of looking at things and stuff of that sort. So don't feel bothered. Just happy
Cool.
to throw ideas back and forth, just kind of basically meeting you at a coffee shop here to chat as friends. But yeah, I mean, look, with chemical agriculture, it's always the same story. They release a chemical, they're like, it's perfectly safe, tested for safety, blah blah blah. 20 years goes by. Actually, it causes cancer. Okay, we're going to get rid of it. Then a new one comes along, it's the same thing. Tested for safety, rigorous testing, this and that. 20 years goes by. Actually, we said it wasn't persistent in the environment, but it's actually leaching on pretty much everything. And like glyphosate's like 80% of rainwater these days in the US. I was like, okay, we'll get rid of it. It's the same story over and over again. So with anything health related, I always go by guilty until proven
Right.
innocent. I got that from Jacob Pierre. So just presume it's not healthy for you if basically, um, no absolutes, but 99.9% of the time, just presume it's not healthy for you. Uh, and that's it. Just go with that, and is it going to prevent everything? No, because just by living in this environment, you're exposed to toxicity for sure.
Yeah.
But you can do a lot also to decrease your toxic load, which will not only decrease your chances of all sorts of cancers being formed throughout your life, et cetera, but also help you in terms of our topic here, most likely with increasing your testosterone, just having vitality, more vitality in your life by just decreasing your toxic load overall. But I mean, yeah, I mean the labels are all over the place. I forgot exactly your question, but you with the crop. So first of all, with the financial thing, I have a thing with this one because yes, some people for sure can't afford organic or better quality food, and there are various levels of integrity of improvement, right? So most Americans would improve just by simply eating single ingredient foods only. So the steak, the chicken, the broth, even if it's factory farmed, that's still a huge upgrade from what they're doing now, anyways. So that'll be a super massive improvement already. And if you really want to go up a level, you can start with going from factory farm stuff to at least USDA organic stuff.
Right.
There's a little
Right.
wiggle room here, a large conversation we can have with what the USDA organic label even means these days. But it's still a huge upgrade because it will actually, the label still is good for decreasing people's exposure to synthetic biocides and GMOs, also beta agonists, steroids, antibiotic use in poultry or any animal products in general, and stuff of that sort. And if people want to go up another level, then they can go more towards like pasture raised meats that are fed a species specific diet and biodynamic crops, etc. And if they want to go even a level up from that, I'll just go towards like wild game, wild fish, which is kind of more of what I'm leaning towards. Since April, I've only been eating elk, deer, wild fish, and then grass-fed, like legitimate AGA certified grass-fed beef or bison one day a week. But the rest of the time,
Yeah.
I'm just eating elk, deer. Who knows if it's going to have an impact, right? I'm just going to do a 12-month experiment on it. The blood work was already looking good, just doing all the stuff I'm going to mention here. But I'll just see. I just always go off the premise like the further from farming you get away from, the better the food quality is always going to be in the sense of the more optimal and healthy it's going to be for you. The
Yeah.
more farming, the more human hands that are on that food, the worse it's going to become.
Right.
With
Do you
processed,
know
the worst of the
do,
worst.
do you know Monsell Denton down in Austin? The Sacred
Yeah,
Hunting?
Sacred Hunting. I spoke to him a few times via text only.
Yeah, he's really interesting. He has these like really strict principles, and the guy's he's a wild man. He's outside all day. He's doing most of his time hunting, and when he's not hunting and he's back in Austin, he's at Barton Springs all day in water, in sunshine, barefoot, just being in the grass amongst the trees, getting fresh air. And he has a principle. He's so principled in his eating that he only eats meat that he kills. So it makes it almost impossible for him to go to restaurants, but he's actually saving himself quite a bit of money, and he gets the benefit of being in nature and the solitude and the less technology and distraction being out there, which is actually very challenging as a hunter if you're really doing like a stalk and prey or a move and stalk kind of style of hunting. But man, he did a semen analysis. I hope he doesn't mind me sharing this, but I was like floored by how high quality his sperm and the motility and everything was. And he's definitely not using any pharmaceuticals, and he definitely has a lot of testosterone around, and he's definitely got a lot of muscle on his body, but he's eating very, very little from any grocery store. So he doesn't even think about labels. Like he's just like, I only eat meat if I killed it, because that's the only way to know for sure that this was wild game that's been, grazing on wild grass and whatever. And um, that's probably not accessible to all of us. But if we just continue to teach to the like lower end of the curve, then we're never going to get anywhere. So we have to also recognize that there is an ideal. Like there is a very, very good way to eat. And if you can't afford to do everything that you're talking about today, that's okay. Like you said, take little baby steps. Every little thing that you replace in your diet, whether it's like a vegetable oil being replaced with, I don't know, avocado oil or something, like doing these little basic things. If that's all you can afford to start with, just do that. Like there's no reason to try to be perfect here.
Yeah, my argument is most Americans could afford to do everything we're talking about here. So, just to give you an idea in terms of the nutrition topic here, the average American does spend about eight to $16,000 a year on non-essential expenses without
Yeah.
even thinking twice about it.
Yeah.
And pretty much 99% of these expenses are sugar highs at best. Eating out, uh, drinking alcohol, travel,
Cigarettes.
subscription services, cigarettes, uh, the new iPhone, like you really even need that. You know what I mean? Just a lot of
Yeah.
these non-essential expenses. Once again, one of my sayings is like sick people can't make healthy decisions, or they wouldn't be
Mm.
sick to begin with. And unfortunately, a lot of people are funding their own pathology unknowingly
Yeah.
due to the fact that they really don't have a good, solid set of core values, like well-defined core values. So obviously, they fall victim to marketing propaganda very, very easily and kind of confuse that for their own core values,
Mm.
et cetera, et cetera. So that's eight to $16,000 a year for at least a grocery store level USDA organic diet. That's 2,000 calories a day. It's going to cost you about 5,000 a year with today's prices too.
Wow.
5,000 a year. So of course, no absolutes. I'm sure some people definitely can't afford it, but they're spending eight to $16,000 a year on all these non-essential expenses. How do you not have $5,000 a year for organic food? And that's because marketing in the U.S. has done a very good job at making Americans believe what's not important is actually important, and what is important isn't important, and stuff of that sort. So
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
long conversation too. But just to give you an idea, like they have the money. Also, if you count what's the number one reason for personal bankruptcy in the U.S., accounting for 70% of all personal bankruptcies? Health issues.
Mm.
Okay,
Yeah.
like how much is a bankruptcy going to cost you? B, what's I mean, this is up your kind of a little bit more up your alley. Uh, but I think just loss of attraction, like physical attraction to the partner, is the second leading reason for divorce, top of financial issues. Okay, so what's like that going to cost you? And
Yeah.
then on
Yeah.
top of that, um, America right now is spending about cumulatively in terms of health expenses $14,000 a year per citizen. And right now, 9 out of 10 Americans are metabolically sick.
Mm.
So that's 9 out of 10, with 50% of them predicted to be obese by 2030. So right around the corner. And if you count overweight and obese, it's about 90% of the population. And if you look up at the fact that 70% of all personal bankruptcies happen because of health issues, and
Yeah.
90% of the population is unhealthy, that's going to be disastrous economically in the near future, not even in like some hypothetical few hundred years from now kind of situation.
Yeah.
In the near
Preach, baby.
future, I think, like, I also read that the U.S. I don't know. This number is going to be wrong. I'm pretty sure some guru online is going to put up a video of me. See, and these numbers are wrong. So this is just a guesstimate. But I think it was like 30% of the total GDP of the U.S. was spent on helping people with their health issues. So just to
That
give you,
sounds about right. That sounds about right. Yeah, I mean, we're talking trillions of dollars are being spent on like conventional healthcare alone. So,
yeah,
and we know that. I mean, that's a pretty obvious statistic that you can go to the probably the Department of whatever, the Bureau of Labor Statistics or whatever. We can see how, well, it's probably not the Bureau of Labor Statistics, but I've we know what the cost of healthcare is. We've seen it compared to all these other countries, and despite us spending so much, we're not getting much more with regards to longevity or health span for sure. So Eugene, I'm going to take us back to, so we were talking about how to optimize, the lifestyle, right? And we could go really, really deep into the food system and everything else. I encourage everybody to go and buy your book. I want people to really understand this topic. And for how much is your book?
I think it's like $15. I don't
So
know.
for
Yeah.
15 bucks, that's a really great use of your money as opposed to another bottle of wine. So go and buy the book. Like we're going to be looping back into this, but let's get back to sort of in the interest of time.
Yes.
What are some of the other things that we should be considerate of when we're looking at our serum testosterone levels and what one might experience as optimal health as a man?
Yeah. So another big one that's totally free and anyone can do, and I know it's simple. Everyone's going to go, haha, I know it. Sleeping. Right? It's huge. And that alone, if you master that and get super quality sleep, that can bump you up a few hundred nanograms per deciliter alone.
Amazing.
So what is good sleep? So I'll define it generally as sleeping between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. So your body generally repairs itself from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. physically and 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. mentally, having an important nighttime ritual and morning ritual and getting up early enough to make sure, you're out of energy by the end of the day. And then also, I'm a huge believer in 20-minute midday naps, uh, especially after a workout. Usually my morning routine is like I get up at 6:30ish or so. I drink some coffee, always in glass, organic coffee, just a cup, like very small, like 1 cup, nothing crazy. I go to the gym, I get back from the gym, I take a shower, I eat a meal, and then I take a 20-minute nap right after, then begin my day. And that makes a huge difference in terms of your energy production, as well as how rested you feel, which is going to be super important for keeping your testosterone high. Because unfortunately, a lot of people are too on the go these days. Average American is sleeping like 5 hours a day, getting up and just basically working all day, hustling and going there and that and that. And we'll touch on central nervous system management, which is huge too,
Yes,
because
please.
oftentimes um, it's kind of a tough conversation because the thing that made America great is also the thing that's destroying a lot of Americans, and that's the work
Mm.
culture. The thing that made America great in various ways, not every way, is also ironically what's destroying a lot of people's, happiness and health and stuff of that sort. So sleeping between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Once again, for the listener, I know it's easy to understand, but are you really doing it?
Mm.
And sometimes like, yeah, I'm going to sleep at 10 p.m. Okay, cool. You're going to sleep at 10 p.m. You're on your phone for an hour. You're really falling asleep at 11 p.m. And if you average out your time during the week, you just lost 7 hours of physical repair time in 1 week. And you've been
Yeah.
doing that for like 10 years. No wonder
Yeah.
you can't recover from workouts and your testosterone is so low. You're just running on exhaustion and adrenal fatigue, basically, especially combined with people's financial stress these days. Unfortunately, according to Robert Kawasaki, the average American has like less than $1,000 to his name. That's pretty stressful
Oh yeah.
because that's one car, whatever, mishap away from just being out of money completely or being in the negative. So sleep. Another important thing is using like obviously working out. And again, I'm just like these things are so obvious, but no one's really doing it, or if they are doing it, they're not doing it right for themselves, because a lot of times people are just operating in a very fatigued state. And if they're already very exhausted and they're doing something like CrossFit or high intensity training, for example, it just sends them deeper into exhaustion. And of course, your body's producing testosterone when it's resting, when it's well rested, not when it's exhausted and constantly, fighting off the stresses of the world. So that's going to play a huge role. So I found great results with clients of all ages by putting them on a well designed undulating periodization program. And it needs to be
Let's talk about
customized.
that.
Yeah, and it just is. I mean, it's very simple. It's been around for a very long time. Everyone has a slightly different way of doing it, I'm sure. I just kind of cycled in between like an accumulation phase and intensification phase, then just back to back, just recycle those two phases and just gradually basically start at a higher rep and higher volume and just gradually decrease the reps and volume as you go on. I'm a huge believer in including a deload week once every three to 4 weeks or so. I think this is huge. A deload week is basically you don't do as much volume or as much intensity for 1 week out of the 4 weeks of a training cycle. And this is huge because you don't want to keep running your body at 100 miles an hour all the time. That's going to wear you down. And what pace it needs to be done is going to depend from person to person too. Obviously, if they're like super stressed out and working 80 hours a week, you're going to need to adjust everything in the program to that person. They might not even be able to work out. It might be pointless for them to work out until they get their energy system back to at least
Yeah.
somewhat normal, and then
Yeah.
incorporate light intensity exercise and then kind of build off there once they become healthier enough. But as you know, the average person's like 5 hours of sleep. They're very overweight on a few pharmaceutical drugs, uh, not living in alignment with their core values on a bunch of poor diet, et cetera, et cetera. So it would be a bad idea for them to do high intensity training or training with a lot of volume. Um, but that's what's advertised, you know. So the average person goes online and they see people pushing themselves really hard, so they're like, "This is what I must do." But I'm like, no, in fact, like I've learned over the years, just leaving 1 to 2 reps in the tank every set, I've actually been able to build a better body and have less tweaks in my physique than going absolute Conan berserker style every single workout and just beating yourself down. Although from time to time it's still cool to do, but it's just not a regular thing of my training schedule. So it's important to really be on a well-designed program for you, what your goals are. So if you're training for aesthetics, the program needs to emphasize aesthetics. If you're training for running or you want to be a power lifter or whatever, better at hunting, it needs to be tailored to that. I think that's so important.
Always
That's why,
back to goals. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. That's why it's so important to be crystal clear on what you're trying to achieve. And sure, you can follow stuff online like our podcast here, but really, we never met you. You know, we don't know your exact situation, your exact starting place. And it's easy for a person that doesn't know much about that field to take information out of context. That's so
Yeah.
easy, and that happens all the time. And they try to apply it, and they don't get anywhere. And then they do something silly like blame their genetics, you know, or something
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that. The application.
I used to be pretty obsessive with exercise. I was like an Ironman distance triathlete and I was a CrossFit coach and I was doing all this and got my Olympic weightlifting certification and I was just like punishing myself all the time in the gym and when I would travel, this is kind of going back to something you said about periodization. When I would travel then I didn't have heavy weights and I actually would beat myself up for not working out. You know, I'd feel bad that I didn't get to the gym because I'm so consistent all the time. But the beauty of it was, oh, I'm on a week of vacation. I'm sleeping more. And as long as I'm still eating, great food and hydrating well, I want to have sex again and my skin clears up and I don't end up with this like dandruffy pattern in my beard and hair. And I get back to my workouts and I'm like beefier than ever. It's like that week of rest
Mhm.
actually was so much better for my body. Like just taking a week, I just challenge everybody if you're going to go on a week of vacation, embrace the sleep, embrace the relaxation, the not having to multitask and all of that. Forget the gym. Just allow yourself to just be still. And all of those systems within your operating system, if you want to call it that, they're all going to benefit from that. And then long term, that actually plays out. So one week per month, if you're consistent, might be a perfect time to just take your foot off the gas and make sure you're optimizing the other things and take a break from exercise. It works like a charm. I've been doing it now for years.
Yeah, once again, deload weeks, they're miraculous for recovery and also just proper building out your program properly, not including too many sets, but just the right amount, you know, to get things moving and stuff of that sort. And and stuff of that. Damn it, I wanted to say something, totally just blanked out on it. But stuff of that sort. So when traveling, I used to do it a lot. I don't do it anymore. I usually try to take a week off completely every 12 weeks of training.
Mm,
So every 3 cycles, I take a week off completely, and I usually try to schedule my travel, my that week off during those periods of travel. That way, you just take the whole time off, and you could also enjoy your trip a bit more too, instead of
sure.
stressing about like even bringing bands and having to do that workout in like a hotel or Airbnb, which always kind of sucks, you know. And then stuff of that sort. But the key point, we can talk about this one for hours. I know people are going to destroy me for saying this. I personally found greater gains by taking away barbell back squats, front squats, and deadlifts from my routine,
No
and actually
kidding.
feel
Whoa.
far more rested during the week as well, because it's not so taxing on the central nervous system. Because obviously, with like a squat and a deadlift, I mean, you're using like everything in your body. And I also found personally for me, and I just stopped doing it with a lot of my clients too, unless they really insisted on it or it's needed for their specific goal. It's just the mind muscle connection isn't really there. So for aesthetics, which is mainly what I'm concerned with, you can just develop a better looking body and more customized physique look by excluding those huge movements, because those movements might also overdevelop muscles that are already overly developed, but they're included in the left lift whether you want to include them or not.
Right. Right.
So it could throw your physique off visually, if that's a
Mm,
concern. If not,
yeah.
there's a lot of reasons for integration and function to include those movements, which is just not a concern for me. And it's just, I could do construction work and climb mountains and go hunting just fine on my routine. I haven't seen
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
any issues at all.
Again,
So
again, the goals, like for the young dads out there, it may not be that you're going to be the biggest, buffest dude in the gym anymore, but you sure as hell need to make sure that you can crawl on the ground and lift heavy bags, like with one arm and one kid in the other arm, and rotate and translate this into daily life. I always tell people, like, if you're approaching a time where you think you might be ready to have kids and you and your partner want to know what to do right, all of this stuff applies. You just have to like translate it then into what your actual life as a father means. Like, so I'm not doing deadlift. I do deadlift maybe like once a week, but it's just because I want my nervous system to remember what it feels like to pick up 300 pounds. Like, let's just remember this. Okay, good. You're good. Like, we don't need to do this as a 3 sets of 5 necessarily, although I usually do 5 sets of 5 if I'm going to do like a heavy lift because I don't get to do it very often. But the point here is, at some point your goals may change, and if the aesthetics and everything else change, you have to let go of that old identity, and you have to
mhm.
re-embrace, what's the point of this? Why am I spending an hour in the gym doing this? I don't even spend an hour in the gym anymore. I just don't have that time. But there's ways to still accomplish the benefits of exercise without taking the Arnold Schwarzenegger approach of 6 hour
Sure.
sessions, so we have to kind of reframe and reimagine, what does exercise look like now that our life looks like this. And it could be just body weight stuff, or it could be hunting or hiking or carrying your kids on your shoulders. Man, that is a workout. Carrying your kid for like a mile, a 3-year-old on your shoulders, the core stability, like my hips, my calves, everything's engaged. Like, that's a full workout. So, anyways, I digress. So we've
You
talked
gotta
about, yeah, go
you
ahead.
gotta get it. You gotta get a stroller, Nate.
What's that? How do you spell that?
A stroller. It's probably easier
um,
than carrying the kid the whole time, you
Yeah,
know?
exactly, exactly. Yeah, I mean, in the airports is the funniest because like we arrived in Atlanta for a connecting flight, and for whatever reason the train was down, and we were on like Terminal A, and we had to get to Terminal E or whatever. And Atlanta's just a long, 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 long airport. So we were running, and my wife, we also were carrying ceramic tiles back from Mexico, which we've since put on our stairs. And we had 2 rollerboards with each a box of like 150 tiles. So they were like 80 pounds each of the rollerboards, and we had our 2 kids, and we had the double stroller. So I strapped the 18-month-old to my chest. Stephanie, my wife, put Penny, our 3.5-year-old, in the stroller, put one of the rollerboards in the stroller, and then I was running with the rollerboard behind me with a little girl strapped to my chest, and she's getting all concussed. But man, we like sprinted for probably a mile and a half, through this airport, and made it to our gate. And you could look at it as like, wow, you got your workout in. That's what everybody says. But the way I see it is, fortunately, we're still active in our daily lives so that we can do this without hurting ourselves and, running ourselves into the ground either. So,
Yeah, and that goes back to really being crystal clear on what you're trying to achieve and what you need out of your life, and then getting, your fitness goals to align with that. So for sure, yeah, I mean, if you want to play around with your kids, a good thing to do then would be to determine the weight of your kids and just work with that weight, as your goal, weight through different ranges of motion, and also different dynamic movements, because that's what's going to happen with your dealing with your kids. Obviously, they're going to be like
yeah,
running around like crazy and stuff like that. Actually, I don't have any kids myself. It's just off what I've seen from Disney movies.
you've heard, you've
And
heard
from what
from,
I heard
from Mr. Walt
from,
Disney. Yeah.
yeah, and what I heard from people like yourself. But getting on a proper program is key. Um, Finding stuff online that's taken out of context will maybe produce results short term, but you will definitely hit plateaus. You need really good understanding of periodization. There are a bunch of books on this. Either learn how to be your own mechanic or hire someone to help you. Those are your only 2 options. Okay, but watching stuff online, and it's not going to take you far. Okay,
Yeah.
and definitely the guys with the great physiques that you're watching online have good coaching. They're not watching other people online and trying to copy them. So let's make that clear, just so people don't waste their time. I
Yeah.
know it's tempting to get free information, but it's just unfortunately not that easy. If it was, everyone would be looking crazy and also being very athletic and stuff of that sort, right? So
So,
there,
so Eugene, just in the interest of time, we've got
yeah,
about 20 minutes left.
okay, I'll
Um,
go fast.
we've covered food. I mean, we could go deep on any of these topics. Food, we've covered sleep, we've covered some biomechanics and exercise. What are do you have an additional, you've got like 4 or 5 more things that you recommend, right? Maybe we could gloss over those and then figure out where are the most impactful things that people could do, and then we might even have to do a part 2 to elaborate on some of these other topics, because you're a sort of a breath of fresh air and a wealth of knowledge.
So Nate, sorry man, I kind of blew this one out of the water because I only covered about 10% of the pyramid. You know, I was going too slow. I knew I should have asked how long we had on because I did this
Let's
before.
why don't we plan to do a part 2? Why don't you
Okay,
pick one more? Let's go a little deep on one more, and then we'll
okay,
come back and we'll do the other 75%.
okay, that'd be cool. So I think like an important one too, that's kind of straightforward is I think it's important, especially for the American audience, to coach them on central nervous system management
Yeah,
and
let's
how the
do that.
central nervous system has ideally evolved to function. So ideally, if we look at throughout the 200,000 years of Homo sapien evolution and 2+ million years of just the different, 28 plus human species that have come and gone, I forget how many they found at this point. How has their central nervous system functioned and allowed them to survive? Because that's the only purpose of the central nervous system, to get you to survive better in the external world, right? So outside of just the last 10,000 years, basically you're dealing with hunter gatherers for the most part. I mean, their life was basically, let's look at my region, Ukraine and Moldova, hunting mammoths, right? You're in a small tribe, you're in the forest, basically, you're very wooded areas your whole entire life. Hunting, this mammoth may be actually stressful in the moment, you might lose a person in your tribe, and sure, it spikes that cortisol quite a bit. But then after it's killed, especially in the winter, you don't have to go hunting for quite a long time. And
Mm,
most of the time is just spent hanging out with your tribe. Basically, what everyone does for their week vacation is that's how 99% of people's lives looked before industrialization for the most part, you're in the forest, you're drinking mountain spring water. Basically, you're eating wild game, wild fish, wild crops, uh, et cetera, et cetera. You're in the sun all day, stuff of that sort. So there is a spike in cortisol, and then there's valleys of literally no stress going on. So, and I got a lot of this from Dr. Robert Sapolsky, in his book "Why Zebras Don't Get
yeah,
Ulcers,"
that's a
a
great
great
one.
resource. And he has a lot of free stuff online too if people don't want to get a don't want to buy the book. So he's nice enough to put that out there. And but unfortunately, these days, what you have is an abundance of micro stresses combined with macro stresses, and that's what people deal with. So the average person getting up once again 5 hours of sleep, uh, downing a whole cup of coffee, spiking their cortisol, getting on the freeway, actually driving is fairly stressful
Oh
too.
yeah.
It takes a lot of people don't know because they've been doing it for so long, but it takes a lot of energy for your central nervous system to be able to keep you alert enough to stay in the lanes, navigate with all the cars, the stoplights, et cetera, et cetera. So they get on the freeway, get stuck in traffic. There's cortisol spike right there. Get to work. They're probably not doing a job they like, not working around a coworker or two. There's always that one person in the office you don't like to see. That's going to spike your cortisol. And once again, it's chronic because you're around them like 8 hours a day. You go out to lunch, you eat this highly inflammatory food with probably another cup of coffee. Then you get back to work. It's another 4 hours of that, maybe a deadline that you have to worry about. Then you get back on the freeway. You're stuck in traffic for like an hour or two with all those micro stress. You get home. Probably most people are not in an ideal personal relationship either. There's a bunch of micro stresses as well, probably macro stresses as well. Then there's the financial aspect of life, these bills, that bills, this kid, now my kid's doing this. And you can see it's like an abundance of chronic low grade stress, which a lot of Americans are okay with. They've normalized it. But if you look at how the central nervous system functions, it doesn't deal well with low grade chronic stress. It deals well with those high stressful situations, hunting a mammoth, followed by nothing going on. But unfortunately, you have the ultra terrible combo today of macro stresses, deadlines at work, fight with your boss, followed by a never ending bombardment of micro stresses. And this combination is extremely detrimental to your central nervous system, shoots your cortisol through the roof, which sets a dysregulation in your HPA regulation, which will have a negative impact on your total testosterone for
Oh
sure.
yeah, absolutely.
And that goes back to the American way of life for most people these days, is just unsustainable. And that's the hard question, you know? When you tell them that, they're like, well, shit, what am I supposed to do?
Right.
Well, I can tell you what's worked for me, and it's probably worked for, and everyone has done it differently. But working, 2 days a week remotely for me is huge. Made a huge impact on the quality of my health because not only do I now have more time to sleep in if I want, that way you're never losing sleep. You also have plenty of time to work out. And guess what? You have plenty of time to do nothing, which is great too. You don't always have to be doing something. And that is huge. That rest and recovery is going to be huge to boost up your total testosterone. And working remotely is great if you can do it because it will help distance you uh, from that one coworker that you don't like working with, from having to get on the freeway. It'll give you probably 2 or 3 hours of extra time per day, which is more than enough to take care of yourself, to sleep a little bit more, to go do errands so you don't feel that stacking up throughout the week, et cetera, and a myriad of other benefits as well. And these little things, once again, they're so easy to understand, but are you really doing it?
Mm.
That's where the magic happens, And I would say most people aren't, or we wouldn't be in the situation where we are today with the health of the country. And I would say I would make the argument based on just myself and then also just a lot of the clients I coached. You could get your total testosterone up to like 800 in your 50s. Like I gave you that example of the 56-year-old
Yeah.
client. No, that is normal. Those are normal levels when
Right.
you're living like a
Right.
normal human being. But of
Yeah.
course, when you're not, it becomes very complicated of how to manage the damage control, and B, it just never works out long term. And the people that claim it does work out, I would, I would argue they're not being truthful in their claims.
Yeah. Yeah. Dude, I wish we could hang out. I got to move to San Antonio and we can we'd be having 10-hour coffee sessions. I really appreciate this.
Well, that's why I
Um
told you, like, I'm down to do it for 10 hours. I brought like two
yeah.
cups of coffee even,
Yeah,
dude.
yeah, totally. Well, I've got some other engagements. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a pin in here and we will circle back to cover the rest of this conversation in another part. If I could do 3.5 hour podcasts, I would, but I just have too many other flaming chainsaws in the air. And I need like a couple assistants circulating like buzzards around me, keeping me on track for what I have to get done. But Eugene, thank you so much. You've got quite a bit to share with my community. So if people want to find you, Eugene_Trufkin, Trufkin, and your legal name is Evgeny, right? Like Malkin.
Evgeny, yep, Evgeny
Yeah,
Trufkin, yeah,
got it.
that's like,
So all of Eugene's books are his author name is Evgeny. In case you're confused when you go to Amazon, but the anti factory farm shopping guide and laws of aesthetics, which has a longer subtitle, we'll put everything in the show notes at belovedholistics.com, as well as in the podcast description. And Eugene, you're welcome back anytime, my man. Um, Anything else you want to share with people on how to find you, or something you're really excited to share with the audience before we sign off?
no, I am starting a new research project with Dr. Jason Runtree from Michigan State University on optimizing the nutritional profile of beef and soil health.
Wow.
So I just kind of visited him last week, and we're drawing up some blueprints, but basically how to copy and paste model of how to produce beef that has a good omega-3 to omega-6 ratio, and honestly, like just a much higher nutritional profile, while actually bringing more life back to the soil at the same time.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. So, guys, if you're listening and you want to follow up, I mean, there's going to be people listening, Eugene, that have experience with soil health and whatnot. Best way to find you is through Trufkin Athletics or at Eugene_Trufkin on Instagram. Is that good?
So I think Eugene underscore Trufkin is a fake account. I forgot what my real account was. I have like there are a couple of fake Eugene accounts on Instagram, and Instagram doesn't delete them, unfortunately. I email them, but they don't reply, and they've been on there for years already. There's my website is trufkinathletics.com. My email is there, so if anyone wants to email me, I'm just happy to provide them a lot of resources they can take action on and stuff of that sort.
Beautiful. Thank you. I don't know. Now I'm curious what your actual Instagram handle is, but we'll put it
Yeah,
in the show notes when we
good
find
question.
it.
I don't even know.
Yeah. That's how you and I talk most of the time anyways. That's so
I
funny.
know, but I forget the name. I think it's like Trufkin Athletics or something like that. I got to check.
You're focused on way more important things than what your Instagram handle is. So, Eugene, thank you so much for
No,
coming.
thank
I
you, Nate.
appreciate it.
No, thank you. It's good to connect. Yeah.